So hi guys, welcome to my next video on modelling hints, tips and cheats. Now for June, recently happened yesterday. I had a conversation with a friend who's just getting quite new into scale models, and he was saying to me, Penny, he goes, I'd like to learn to use an airbrush, but I'm really concerned. I says there's a lot of money and I really don't think it's worth it. So I decided that for June I'm going to be doing a 4-part video all about airbrushes, starting with this video, which is just going to be an overbrush of airbrushes. And what I'm going to be doing is a comparison of airbrushes versus a paintbrush, so you can see for yourself if it's actually worth you getting an airbrush and what the differences are. Next week I'll be doing priming with an airbrush, and then the week after I'll be doing painting with an airbrush, following up on the last week of the month, which will be cleaning an airbrush, and then we'll go back to the normal sequence of learning things that I want to show you. But also I'd just like to say now, if there's anything in particular you'd like me to cover, any particular single aspect of modelling, just drop a comment below and then I'll sort a video out. So let's have a look at airbrushing and paintbrushing in general, and we'll do some comparisons. Okay, so the first thing I want to look at is the costs. Now, here I have a paintbrush. This particular paintbrush is, in my opinion, one of the best paintbrushes you can buy. This came from Rosemary & Co.'s, cost me £5, around about £5, depends on what size you buy. Now you could buy the same brush made by Winsor & Newton for about £15. And likewise you can go all the way down to the bottom scale, and you can pick some paintbrushes up very, very cheaply, maybe £1 a brush, or even less if you buy multi-packs. Now the point I'm making there is that going between a budget range and a premium range is still only about a £14 difference. You can start off with a couple of cheap brushes. Over the course of time, like I have with these, you've discovered your favourite brushes, and whereas I have about 10 or 15 go-to brushes, you know, even at a cost of £5 a brush, they've been built up over time. So there's my paintbrush. Now, because I use acrylic paints, and likewise you can use acrylic paints with airbrushing, you need some way to clean your brush. So here we have a water pot, and that's what I use for cleaning my airbrushes. Obviously you'll need this for airbrushing as well, but there's your paint. And again, just like with airbrushes, you need some kind of subject matter. So there's a Spitfire, and voila, I'm ready to go. So the cost of the model, the cost of the paintbrush, and this is quite a flashy water pot, but you know, just you can use a mug just as well. So that's the cost of the paintbrushes. Now the airbrushes is a little bit different. Now this airbrush cost me £15. Well, I say £15. It cost me about £10, but it's that old that you will you'll pick up the same brush for about £15 on eBay. It is a very bottom of the range brush, and I've had to do an awful lot of work, to get it looking to working nice. And this is my second airbrush. This is an Iwata, I keep forgetting what it is. It's an Iwata CR. Now this is a basic Iwata airbrush. This came as part of a set with a compressor. And I believe this cost about £250 with the compressor. Now if I'd have made this video last week, I would have told you that, well, it still applies, but airbrushes can cost you upwards, anyway, anything up to about £400 or £500 an airbrush. However, I've just had a recent recommendation, which when I get round to buying one, I will do a review on the channel. But there's an airbrush made by Ultimate Products. It's called the Apex. It's £100, and a lot of people who have used it have said it's really good airbrush. It's a really good workhorse, does the job extremely well, has a nice thin nozzle so you can do some fine detail work, and it's a very good airbrush. But even so, you know, if a £100 airbrush turns out to be the best airbrush in the world, and I'm not sure that it will, you still compare that to what I consider the best paintbrush, you know, there's still an £85 difference. So that is the cost of the airbrush. Let's switch to my overhead camera and I will show you the space that they take up. Now I'm very lucky, I have a very large desk, but when I'm painting, I mean I've shown you this already. How much space do I need to do painting with a brush? Well, the bottom line is that's all the space I need. I have my pot of water for thinning. Let's go a little bit flashing, a little bit extreme, and we'll get my wet palette out. This is obviously you need somewhere, if you're lucky, I mean sometimes you can paint straight from the bottle, as you can see there, but let's push this for the space. Let's get my wet palette out, and as you can see I've got quite a few bits and bobs there, and really that's all the room that's taken up. And then when I'm finished, you know, you can see this all packs away into a nice small area. So let's just pop this away. Now not everybody, and this includes me as well, but not everybody has the space permanently, and like I say, I'm no exception, but I am very lucky in that I do have space for boxes. So what I tend to do is items that I'm not using every day get stored in a box, so when I need them the box can come out. And like I say, I do consider myself lucky. So here we have my compressor, and that compressor needs to go somewhere, and it needs to be plugged into an electrical supply. So now that means my desk has to have power nearby. Most of you probably will have a power supply nearby, because most of you will be plugging in a desk lamp. So we also have, this is a spray out pot, so when you clean your airbrushes out you spray everything into there and it just stops everything from going. Now one area I haven't actually covered as a subject, which will be covered by this one item, is I have a respirator. And the reason I have a respirator is because obviously by the nature of an airbrush I'm going to be throwing particles of paint up in the air. I'm going to breathe those in, and that's going to do more damage to the lungs than, you know, my lungs are going to be worse than they are already. I already suffer from asthma. I certainly don't want that to get any worse. So before I've even looked at any paint, oh obviously we need the airbrush as well, and obviously I need to put this compressor within reach. I mean this is quite good because it's got a really long air hose, but obviously I'm now restricted in how far I can be from a power supply. So that's the next issue, is the space. So let's talk about the next area, which is so I've covered two areas there on the brushes, and so far it's not looking good for the airbrush, is it? It's certainly 2-0 to paintbrushes, but I want to try and address that balance now, and let me just pull up the next thing. So the next area that I want to cover is faster and easier paint application. So what I have on screen here is a picture of the Border Models 1:32 scale Lancaster. Now this is a huge model, and as you can see there's an awful lot of flat surface area, which obviously you'd like to paint. That's going to be absolute hell to paint. Now obviously if I say to you 1:32 scale and it's a Lancaster, if you don't know much about the Lancaster, you really have no idea how big that is. So what I'd like you to do is, if you look at the fuselage down the middle, just to one side you have an engine. Just have a little look at the base of that engine where it meets the wing. So keep looking, visualize how big you think that is, and there you go. That is a close-up of the wing. You can see where the engine is, you can see the guy's hand. So now you've got some idea of the size. So let me flip back to that. So you see where the engine is, and then you can see where his hand is. Now imagine how long it would take you to paint that with a brush. Now also consider that when you paint with an airbrush, you can get the layers down quicker. This is something that I will show you in 2 weeks time when I do painting. But when you apply paint with an airbrush, you're laying down nice thin layers. Because they're nice thin layers, they're going to dry almost instantly. They're going to be ready for the next layer. Let me show you something that I've painted with an airbrush. Sorry, with a paintbrush. Is this ever going to happen? Can't change my scenes. So here we have a 1:72 scale Spitfire that has got one layer of paint on it. Now I'm more realistically going to be laying down 3 layers of paint for that, to get a nice finish. And then on top of that I've got the camouflage pattern. So I've got 6 layers of paint in some areas that I'm going to be doing there. Then I'm going to be applying a gloss coat so that I can put decals on. Then I'm applying another gloss coat over that. Then I'm going to be doing the weathering. Then I'm going to be doing another varnish layer over the top of that, a matte varnish layer to seal in all of that weathering and decals. So there's what, a good 11-12 layers of paint going on that. Now this is a 1:72 scale Spitfire, which isn't really that big. Now compare that to this, 11 layers of paint with a paintbrush on that. That's going to be absolutely horrendous. So that's that picture. So this is another picture of the wing, another picture of the wing, and look, this is just the instrument panel, and then there's all the fine detail, because don't forget, if that's your Lancaster from the outside, you've got all the little bits inside to paint. So there is everything that you're going to be painting. So I can hear you saying, okay Penny, you know, that's a £600 model. I'm certainly not going to be buying anything that big. So I have got for you a smaller model. This is a B29, and you see there's a guy holding it, so you can see how big it is. So you know, there's a smaller model, and yes, I am going a little bit extreme here, but you know, there's an awful lot to paint there, and that would be very, very hard work with a paintbrush. So the next thing that I want to discuss, and I'm going to go back over to my front camera. So this is going to be pushing a little bit more towards the airbrush, and we have a learning curve. When I personally have found, you know, there's lots of different techniques, blending techniques, that when you sorry, bear with me, I'm just getting another picture ready. There we go. So blending techniques, learning curve. To use an airbrush, when you start doing different things with an airbrush, they're a lot easier to master. because you're using very thin layers of paint. So for example, when you're transitioning one colour to another, maybe you want to use you want to play with the different colours. It's very hard to do with a paintbrush. Not impossible, and in fact if you can master it with a paintbrush, the results are very good, but they're much easier with an airbrush. So let me show you another model that I've done, and so I'm just trying to get it carefully. So this is a technique that I've used called Preshading, and what I've done is I've applied very thin layers of coat to achieve a sun bleached effect. Now I did this, okay, I've got experience with an airbrush, so I know how the airbrushes work, but I pretty much mastered that on a second attempt. In fact, this might actually be my first attempt, but let's say I've done it with my second attempt. This is another model that I've done trying to achieve the same effect, and this was definitely my second attempt. And the way I've achieved that is I've applied a lot of black. I've then gone over with some white, and then I've gone over with the colour that I want to use, and then I've just kept going over with thin layers, and then once I'm almost there, I'm starting to target individual panels, and then these larger panels I've then just applied a little bit of white to my base colour and just given that a little bit extra, and then the very larger panels I've just gone slightly lighter again. And as you can see, there isn't much difference. You know, this is a lighter shade of grey than this, and this bit there is actually the same shade of grey as this. It's just that the layer of paint is a lot thinner, and as you can see, we get this effect where the colour is different, because you know, anybody knows if you leave something out in the sun starts to fade it, and you get this. But at the same time, you get muck build up in the panels. So this is something that can be achieved with a paintbrush, but it's so much easier with an airbrush. So I'm going to show you a picture of a model which has been pre-shaded, and this shows you the technique very well. So what this guy has done is on all the panel levels. Now when I say panel level, what I mean is a change of gradient. Any lines that have been cut out of the model, you'll see that it's not completely flat surface, it's got circles and lines, and that's what we refer to as a panel line. So what he's done is he's gone through all the panel lines, and you see that there's distinct black lines cutting all over the place, and then he's popped some little white bits in the middle. So this model is ready to have the main colour applied on it, and because he's going to be applying very thin coats, this black and this white is going to slightly show through with a finished model. So the last thing that I want to discuss is special effects. That's not the picture I was looking for, and this is an extremely good example. This is a Messerschmitt 109. Now I don't know what scale this is, but this could be any scale. This could be 1 to 72, it could be 1 to 144, it could be 1 to 2 scale. The effects really don't make any difference. So let me just bring that in. So you'll see there's a distinct camouflage pattern, and see all along the side of the fuselage there's it kind of looks, I think the best way to describe it is the guy who painted that, you know, looks like he's just tested his airbrush and he's got all of these little splodges. Now could you achieve that with a paintbrush? I really don't know. You know, I would be tempted to say that's impossible to do with a paintbrush, but then, you know, every time I say something's impossible, some guy will come along and go, yeah, look what I've achieved with a paintbrush. So I'm not going to say if you can or you cannot. But you know, I certainly couldn't achieve that effect with a paintbrush, but I'm pretty confident I can apply that with an airbrush, with a paintbrush. So let me switch back to me. So there is six areas where the paintbrush and the airbrush is different. You've got the cost, you've got the amount of space, you've got the faster primer and paint application, you've got the smoother paint layers, but you've got the learning curve to use the techniques, and then you've got the special effects. So I hope I've given you enough information on whether you want to use an airbrush. As I say, there will be another 3 videos coming out. Next week we're going to be doing we'll be priming with an airbrush, but I'll also give you the overview of the airbrush. So what I'm going to be doing next week is I'm going to take this airbrush apart. I might actually save that for the last video. We'll have a look. So we're going to be taking okay, so I hope I've given you enough information to decide if you actually want an airbrush, if you feel an airbrush is useful for you. But what I am going to do now is I'm going to have a look at my airbrush, because I'm pretty sure you're asking the question, what are all the bits for? So let's have a look at my Iwater airbrush, and we'll take it apart and we'll have a look at all the parts. So this is my airbrush, and we have various components. So let's start with the ones that don't particularly do much. We have here, this is called the handle, and primarily all that does is it just covers up this area. I've seen a lot of airbrushes not put this on. I like to put it on because you see, although that's a blunt end of a needle, you know, it can still hurt, whereas if you have the handle, that's a lot easier. So that's that. Now we have here a needle, and this is primarily what does the main job. Sorry, I just realized my camera angle is terrible. So what this does, it's difficult to know which end to show you first. Let's switch to the other end. So this is the needle cap, and this primarily, just what I've noticed is that when you have the needle in, so I just do this carefully, you'll see that the needle just projects out of the end, and this is just a little cap. Put that on the wrong way, so I'm not going to hurt myself. Then on top of that we have got the needle cap. This is also called a needle cap, and then see we have the needle. Now the way that an airbrush works is that you have paint coming through the top, and that goes down. You can see there's a hole at the bottom, and then that hole follows all the way through there. Meanwhile, you have an air supply come up here, and the air goes in that way, and then it mixes with the paint and it makes a fine mist of paint. Now when the needle is in that position, it blocks that hole, which is why it's important to have a good needle. The needle, if you were to cut a slice of that needle off and you were going to look under a microscope, what you want is a needle that looks like that. As you can see, that if you put a round peg into a round hole, it makes a perfect mix. Now if you have an airbrush, this is why I had to spend a lot of work on my cheap airbrush, because the manufacturing wasn't so good. It was in fact at a microscopic level, it was that shaped. So as you can imagine, when you put that into a round hole, you can see all of these gaps, so obviously it's not as efficient. So what I had to do, you know, I saved myself about £140, but I had to polish that needle until I got all of those edges off, and now I'm confident that my Chinese airbrush needle looks like that one rather than that one. But this is the needle, and this is a very important part. As you can see, that this is absolutely filthy. I don't know if you can see, it's very hard because my focus doesn't work. Can you see just occasional bits of muck on there? Now, it's very tempting to say, well, that's okay, that's not a problem. Well, it is, because if you add a little clunk of paint on there, what you are in effect doing is turning your needle from that shape to that shape. So it is extremely important to clean your airbrush regularly. So the next thing we have, and this came off earlier on, now this is called a needle chucking nut, and all this does is it just locks that needle. You'll see that this is a split nut there. There's a little hole, a little line going all the way down, and it's that hole is just ever so slightly bigger than the needle. So as you can see, the needle goes in and out no problems, and all this nut here will do is it will just squeeze that gap a little bit. It will grip against the needle, and then now you see I can't pull that needle out, and that's all that does. So as I said earlier on, this is the cup, and this is where you put your paint and thinners, or paint if you buy pre-thinned paint, and then this is where the air hose connects and the air comes up there. Now this is your needle, I've forgotten the name for it, trigger. Now this particular airbrush is a dual action airbrush, and it means that it does two things at once. Now by pressing it, you can see that because the trigger is directly above the air hose, if you look at a car tyre, it has a valve on it, and you'll see that on that valve there's a little needly bit right in the middle, and if you press that needle, all the air will come out of the tyre. This is actually exactly the same, and what this trigger does is when you push it down, it releases the air. So in this position, doesn't matter what pressure the air is coming through, that's not getting through. As soon as I press that, the air comes through. Now as you get more advanced, you will learn that the more, if you just press that just a little bit, you'll get just a little bit of air coming out, and if you press it a lot, the whole lot will come out. You can get airbrushes that have a little nut, and that controls the airflow. So you can set it quite low, so when you push the trigger really hard, you only get a little bit of air. Likewise, you can release loads of air. Now at the same time, by pulling this, it's going to be easier actually to show you with a needle in. So once you've got your needle in, what this trigger will do is it will pull that needle back. So if you watch the end of there as I pull it back, can you see that that needle is coming back? I think that's quite hard. Let me put it against something, so you can see the needle there, and you see it just comes out a little bit. If you watch the end, there's the needle in the end, and then as you pull it back, so what it does, it opens up that hole, and just like with the air, the further you pull it back, see there is just a little bit of air, paint coming through, and there's quite a lot of paint coming through. Again, just like the air bit, you do sometimes get airbrushes that have a little nut on the end. Now this, if I tighten this right up, I can't pull that trigger back. If I undo this, I can put a lot of paint through. If I just tune it a little bit, there we go. So now I've got this set so that I can only pull it back about halfway, and if I'm holding, see how I hold that trigger, and it goes all the way back. If I tighten this up, it restricts that trigger. So if you're doing very, very fine work and you only want a very thin layer of paint, if you adjust this, you can't get too much paint, so you're only going to get a light dusting of paint. The drawback with doing this is that it does make your airbrush more susceptible to clogs, but if you do have it like this, you know, you could be going, okay, yeah, a little fine. Oh no, I slipped, and then loads of paint comes out. Right, so we've covered this this chucking nut. We covered that that needle, and the reason I'm showing you all of this is because you do need to know for when you clean your airbrush. So this bit is the needle chucking guide. Now, sometimes, there we go. So this is going to hold everything in place. You have a spring. Now you need that spring obviously so that you see now when I pull my trigger, it doesn't go back. So that spring is going to push all of this back so that it goes backwards and forwards. Now sometimes you'll get this piece like this, and this is the needle chucking guide, and what that does is that as you put the needle through, the hole is now that you see the size of this hole, and there's a hole there. It's quite easy. If you push that in, you could miss the hole, you could damage the end of the needle. By having this in place, you pop your needle through that tiny hole, and that hole will be lined up with the hole on the end there. Sometimes you get this part is connected. In this particular case it is. On my Chinese airbrush, this is two separate components, so you do have to fiddle about with this to get it into place correctly. And then this is your trigger, and I don't know if you can see in there, I doubt you will, but directly down there is the little release part for the air hose, and you see that there's the needle that will, no, without doing that I can't get it out. So it's just a couple of components left that I need to show you, and for that I'm going to need some equipment. This is the part that you have to be very, very careful with. We have a nozzle there. Now this particular nozzle is 1/2 millimeter, and these vary between, I think the smallest one I've seen is a 0.18 millimeter, or very nearly 0.2, and this is this will enable me to show you the needle a little bit better. So can we have a focus please? Right, so you see there's just a tiny bit of the needle poking out. As I pull the needle back, and this is where a lot of your problems will be, because this is where most of your paint will get clogged. There's two areas I find. One is this, because you're shooting so much paint through such a tiny nozzle, like I say, that is 1/2 millimeter thick. My Chinese brush is even smaller. You can't see it because I've got all the ends on it, but that is 0.2 millimeters. So yeah, it's an area where the clogs will happen. So I have a big mess to put things back together again. Actually, it's not as bad as all of that. I will go through all of this again when we do airbrush cleaning, which will be the last video in June. But I hope that this has helped you. I suspect I may possibly have made this slightly confusing for you, especially by pulling all of this apart. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to cover the basic overview of the airbrush. It certainly is got a higher cost factor than a paintbrush, and as you can see with all this cleaning, this is definitely a disadvantage. As I say, I've just stripped it, I haven't even cleaned it yet, whereas my paintbrush I'll just swish in water, and just to be a little bit extra, I use this for cleaning my brushes. This is a brush soap. This is quite expensive, but it really does do a good job on the paints. But again, even including this, paintbrushes are still far cheaper than airbrushes. So yeah, this is possibly, I don't think that's gone in. I do have trouble. If you have bad eyesight like me, I do struggle lately with close-up work, and I really do struggle to get, this is the one area that I hate doing because it's so tricky to get in. Now obviously if your eyesight's better, it will go bang bang straight in. Let me take my glasses off and I'll probably get it in first time. You know, I spend all this money on glasses and I do most of my best work with my glasses off. Come on. Yeah, that's in. Right. So what I do now is I rush and I get everything in place. Well, that's because that's got to go in that way. There we go, that's in. And then we pop the spring in. And we pop that in. Lovely, that's absolutely fine. And yeah, so sorry, I've kind of got preoccupied with putting the airbrush back together again. So we have got cost factors, so that obviously tips the balance in favour of the paintbrush. We have the amount of space needed, and that certainly doesn't go in an airbrush's favour. Then we have the paint application. And so I certainly wouldn't want to be painting a 1:32 scale Lancaster with a paintbrush. And then we have the smoother paint layers, and I will show you this again. You know, this is my I mean, it's only a base layer, it's the first layer, and I hadn't applied any primer on it. As you see, it's gone down a little bit thicker, so I don't think I would be doing I don't think I would be achieving results like this if I'm painting with a paintbrush like this. So I think it's pretty much tipped the balance even now. And then obviously you've got the learning curve, and I think that really does tip the balance into the favour of the airbrush, because I found it a lot easier to learn at a most basic level. I think, why is that not going in? At a most basic level, obviously painting with a paintbrush is the quickest. You know, you pick up a paintbrush, you paint, and 9 times out of 10 you've got a good result on your first attempt. So long as you master the basics such as thinning your paints. You know, this finish here on this base, that came out quite badly because I didn't thin the paints. So you know, it's a couple of basic rules, but then when you start to get a little bit more advanced techniques such as the pre-shading, I think you learn so much quicker on the airbrush. And then obviously once you get really advanced techniques, they're quite difficult to learn, but you know, you're already halfway there. And then the last thing I think I will probably finish the video with this, because I think it's a really good example of what you can achieve with an airbrush, and that's the special effects. Now obviously if you're not into large Lancasters and you're not into German aircraft, you know, you may decide I don't actually want an airbrush because I'm not going to be doing that. But look at that, is that not a fantastic way to finish the show with a picture of that. I wish that was my work, but sadly it isn't. Right guys, so next week's video we will be doing priming with an airbrush. So it'll be quite a short video, and it'll show you how I like to prime. Now please don't take anything that I say as gospel. Don't forget the first video that I made, and one of the points that I raised was to listen to opinion but don't listen to fact. I'm going to tell you how my opinion on things, and I'm going to tell you how I do things. If you find yourself an easier method to do something that works better for you, then I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. So with that then guys, I will catch you in the next video. Let me just close this off because it's going to interfere. So take care guys, and I will catch you in the next video.